exam. And at the completion of the training, we also take a comprehensive competency exam and a comprehensive written exam.
And additionally, ma'am, over the course of your employment at the crime lab, do you undergo ongoing continuing education?
Yes, there's continuing education in the lab for new techniques and also external trainings that we attend.
And do you undergo testing and quality assurance testing throughout your employment at the lab?
Yes, we take proficiency tests every year. There are 3 that people in my unit take.
And what are those 3?
Body fluid identification, crime scene analysis, and trace evidence analysis.
And just to be clear, the testing that you undergo, those aren't written exams, those are, you test evidence, is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, ma'am, did you have occasion to respond to Danvers High School in the early morning of October 23rd, 2013?
I did. I actually responded to the Topsfield Police Department first.
Okay. And when you responded to Topsfield, what, if anything, did you do?
I was actually told at that time to respond to the Danvers Police Department.
Okay. So you didn't collect anything in Topsfield, correct?
I did not.
Okay. Let me ask you this. During the course of that night, were there other chemists under your supervision working at Danvers High School?
Yes, there were.
Was there something else going on that night in the county that also required your attention?
Yes, there was.
What was that?
There was a homicide in Methuen on the same night.
Okay. So at some portion of the night, did you go to Methuen?
I did.
Okay. Ultimately, did you return to the Danvers Police Department? After Topsfield?
After Topsfield, I went to the Danvers Police Department. After I returned from Methuen, I actually went to the Danvers High School.
Okay. When you were at the Danvers Police Department, did you have occasion to examine the hands of Philip Chism?
I did.
Okay. And can you describe for the jury how you do an examination, as a chemist, how you do an examination of someone's hands?
First, I just do a visual examination and note if there are any injuries present or if there are any stains present.
And why are you looking for injuries?
To note that, and there might be blood present from an injury that didn't come from a separate incident.
Okay. And in the case of Mr. Chism, did you observe any injuries to his hands?
I did not.
And did you observe any stains on his hands?
I did.
And what did those stains look, how did those stains appear to you?
There was a red-brown stain on his left palm.
And what, if anything, did you do to do a collection from his hands at that time?
The first thing I did was I screened his hands for the presence of blood. So I screened the red-brown stain separately from the rest of his hands. And each of those were positive. I then swabbed the red-brown stain on his left hand, and I also swabbed, using a sterile swab and sterile water, his right hand.
So first you confirmed that the red-brown stain you could see screened positive at least for blood, is that correct?
It did screen positive for blood.
And Ms. King talked to us a little bit about the screening test you used. Did you use the same screening test do you have one screening test you use in the field?
Yes.
And is that with the filter paper and the chemical?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So the red-brown stain on Mr. Chism's left hand screened positive for blood, is that correct?
Yes, it did.
And is there a reason that you still do a collection even from a hand that you don't see an obvious stain?
Yes, our screening test for the presence of blood is very sensitive, and if that is positive, we will actually make that collection and send a sample to our DNA unit to process. Is
there something called a cult blood?
Yes, there is.
What's a cult blood?
A cult blood is blood that you can't see with the naked eye.
Okay. So you actually took samples from both of the defendant's hands, is that fair to say?
Yes, I did.
And what do you do to preserve those for further testing?
At the scene, I labeled envelopes for each of those swabs, and I put them into the envelopes. I then brought them back to the lab and gave each of those swabs an item number under this particular case and put them in our cold storage unit.
While you were at the Danvers Police Department, did you also collect Mr. Chism's clothing?
I actually returned later that afternoon to collect the clothing.
Okay. And what do you do to bag clothing at the scene for transport back to the lab?
We take brown paper bags, label the outside with the item that's inside the bag and put each individual item into its own bag.
And why do you package things that way?
So that no other evidence can transfer onto the item.
Each piece of clothing gets its own bag, so it's not touching each other. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
Okay. Now, do you remember what clothing you collected at the Danvers Police Department belonging to the defendant?
Yes.
What clothing did you collect?
I collected a black shirt, black shorts, and black socks.
And now, did you do any collections yourself once you returned to Danvers High School after you went to Methuen?
I assisted Kelly with her examination and collecting evidence, and then separately I also collected several items from Trooper Ulrich.
Okay. And where had those items come from?
Those items had come from the Topsfield Police Department.
Okay. And did you assist Ms. King as well? Fair to say there were a lot of items that had been collected at Danvers High School, is that correct?
Yes, there were.
Did you assist Ms. King in bagging and cataloging the items that had been taken at Danvers High School?
Yes, I did.
Now, with respect to the criminalistics work in this case, meaning the examinations that were done back at the laboratory, were you the person who did those?
Yes.
Now, specifically with respect to those 2 swabs that you had taken from the hands of the defendant, did you do any further testing on either of those swabs?
I did.
Can you explain that to the jury?
The swab of the left hand with the red-brown stain, I tested for the presence of human blood.
And can you just explain the distinction between the test you do in the field and the test you do in the lab?
The test that we do for human blood is specific to humans and higher primates, and it can also test positive for ferrets. But we use this test to determine whether something is human blood or not.
And in fact, what was the confirmatory test on the swab you took from the left palm of Philip Chism?
It was positive.
For human blood?
For human
blood.
Or
ferrets or higher primates. Is that fair to say? Okay. And with respect, the swab you took from the right hand where there hadn't been any visible stains, what did you do with that swab?
I visually examined that swab and then packaged it for potential DNA analysis.
And when you're, with respect to the swab of the left palm, the one that had a red-brown stain, what, if anything, did you do to preserve that after you tested it for confirmation of human blood?
I cut that swab in half. I put half of the swab into a small tube for DNA analysis, and the second half I packaged into just a glassine envelope to preserve for future analysis as well.
All right, let's take the morning recess. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take the morning recess. If you're ready to be back in the courtroom at 11:05, that's what time we'll have you back in. If you find that you need more time, just let the court officers know and take the time that you need. Don't discuss the case among yourselves with anybody else. First thing I'll do when you come back. Ms. McDougall, please.
Ms. Scott, you talked about certain clothing that you took that that you ultimately collected from the Danvers Police Department belonging to the defendant. Is that correct?
Yes.
Showing you what's already been marked is Exhibit 19. Do you recognize that item?
Yes, I do.
Did you conduct further, and that's the black shirt that was taken from the defendant that he was wearing when he was found in Topsfield, is that correct?
Yes.
And did you conduct further examination of that item at the lab?
Yes, I did.
Can you describe the examination you conducted of that item at the lab?
I did a visual examination and noted stains, red-brown stains, on the exterior front left shoulder, the abdominal area, the rear left shoulder, and the lower back area.
And what, if any, testing did you conduct on those stains?
I used our screening test for the presence of blood, the same test we used in the field, we used in the lab, and each of those areas was positive for the presence of blood.
And again, if you could just show us, actually, it would be easier if I held the item up, and then you can show us where you saw.
So the left shoulder area, the abdominal area, and the rear left shoulder, which is over here, and the lower back area.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Ms. Scott, showing you what's already been marked as Exhibit 14. Can you tell us if you recognize that item?
Yes, these are the underpants that I examined.
And can you describe for us, please, the examination you conducted on those, the female underpants?
I noted red-brown stains on the front panel and the label of the underpants, and I screened those for the presence of blood. Both were positive, and I used the human blood test as well, and those were positive. And I then further examined the crotch area of the underpants, where I noted white stains, and I did testing for the presence of semen on these stains. The first test is a screening test for the presence of semen, and that involves applying a piece of clean paper to the area and adding 2 chemicals. It's very similar to the blood test. And if there's a purple reaction, that test is positive.
And in this case, was the test positive for the presence of semen?
It was not.
Okay. Do you do further testing on that, on the underpants?
I did further testing. I took 2 small cuttings from the interior crotch, one from the front and one from the rear, and extracted those for sperm cells.
And can you explain to the jury, and you can put those down if you want, how you extract for sperm cells?
So I took a small cutting, again from the front and the rear of the crotch, and I put those into a small tube. I added several chemicals and was able to take off the cellular material that wasn't sperm cells, and I have a pellet at the bottom of the tube that could potentially be sperm cells. I then take that and put it on a microscope slide and examine it under a microscope.
And in this particular case, were you able to locate any sperm cells from the testing you did from the interior crotch of the woman's underwear?
I was not.
Now, did you do anything to collect anything else that you observed in the area of the underwear?
I did cut the crotch out of the underwear and swabbed that for DNA.
Now, Miss, and what did you do with that swab once you had done that?
I cut that swab, put it into a small tube, and sent it for DNA analysis.
Now, Ms. Scott, based on your training and experience, and particularly in terms of testing you've done in cases where there's allegations of sexual assault, is there a reason that you specifically examined the crotch area of the underpants for the presence of seminal fluid or sperm cells?
If sexual assault occurs, there could be drainage from either the vaginal or anorectal cavity onto the underpants.
If the person is still wearing them and then upright again in the aftermath of intercourse, is that fair to say?
Yes.
Now, in addition to those items, I'll show you another item. Showing you what has been marked in Exhibit 6. If you
Yes, this is the box cutter that I examined.
And can you describe for us whatever testing you did on that box cutter?
Yes, there were red-brown stains on both the handle and the blade of the box cutter, and I screened those for the presence of blood, and then tested both for human blood.
And what were the results of that test?
Both were positive.
In addition to the testing and the screening, do you also examine that item with the naked eye?
Yes.
What, if any, observations did you make of the condition of the box cutter?
I noted that there were things written on both sides of the box cutter in black marker.
And additionally, as part of your examination, do you take measurements of the box cutter?
I do.
And can you describe the results of those measurements?
The box cutter is approximately 7 inches long. It had an approximately 1-inch blade, which was approximately 3/4 of an inch wide.
Thank you. Now, ma'am, were you able to examine a swab of a red-brown stain that Miss King had taken from the end of the branch that was located in the woods?
Yes.
Can you describe for us any testing you did on that red-brown stain?
I tested that red-brown stain for human blood.
And what were the results of that test?
That was positive.
Now, at some point, did you have occasion with Trooper Crump to also examine the branch itself?
I did.
It was a determination made that your testing would go forward ahead of any testing he might do.
Yes.
Were there any other than the red-brown stain at the end that Miss King had already swabbed, did you swab or test any other stains or markings on the branch?
There were also, there were 3 red-brown stains in the middle of the branch that I screened for the presence of blood and tested for human blood, and those were positive. There were 2 additional red-brown stains on the middle of the branch that I screened for the presence of blood. And there were 2 brown stains on the branch or marks that I screened for the presence of blood, and those were negative.
So there was some what tested positive for blood midway down the branch, but there's other staining on the branch that was negative for blood. Is that fair to say?
That's correct.
Now, did you receive a series of swabs that Miss King had taken from various locations in the bathroom and the hallway of Danvers High School?
I did.
And did you conduct the same testing on all of those swabs?
Yes, I tested each one for human blood.
And with respect to the swabs that Miss King had taken from the floor of the hallway as well as from the bathroom, what were the results of those tests?
Positive for human blood on all of the swabs.
Okay. And in particular, had she taken a cutting from the toilet paper roll in the second stall in the girls' room on the second floor?
She did.
And again, what was the results of testing on that toilet paper roll?
I tested that piece of toilet paper for human blood, and it was positive.
I want to just go back to the branch for one moment, ma'am. Much the same as with the box cutter, did you also take measurements of that item?
I did.
And can you tell us the approximate dimensions of the tree branch?
It was approximately 36 inches long, and it weighed approximately 0.45 pounds.
Now, ma'am, did you also receive jeans that were located in the pricker bush in the field across from Danvers High School?
I did.
Handing you what's been marked Exhibit 87. If you could look at that item and tell me if you recognize it. Pocket of those jeans when you were examining them?
I did.
What did you find?
I found a Spanish quiz.
And did the Spanish quiz have anyone's name on it?
The name written on it was Philip C.
Okay. And what did you do with, when you got the positive test for human blood on those jeans, what, if anything, did you do to take a sample?
I swabbed the area.
And did you preserve that for DNA in the same way you've described preserving other items?
I did.
And just to be clear, Ms. Scott, you don't do the DNA testing in this particular case yourself. Is it handed off from another unit?
That's correct.
Okay. And if you can put the genes away, I will get you another item. Showing you what's been marked Exhibit 84, Ms. Scott. You could tell us if you recognize that item.
I screened those for the presence of blood and tested them for human blood.
And what were the results of that testing?
Those were positive.
And did you do anything to preserve those items?
I swabbed them and
Characterize the blood stains on that glove at all?
yes, I did.
How did you characterize it?
I characterized them as saturation stains.
And if you could just show us on the glove where you described saturation stains.
So on this palm area, it's on the interior and exterior of the exterior and interior of the glove.
Finally showing you Exhibit 79. Tell us if you recognize that item.
Yes.
And what do you recognize that item to be?
This is the right glove that I examined.
And can you describe any observations and testing you did on that glove?
I noted that there were red-brown stains on the front and rear exterior of the glove, and I screened the red-brown stains on the wrist area and the interior palm.
And what were the results of that testing?
Those are positive.
And did you do the confirmatory test or just the screening test?
I also tested for human blood, and that was positive.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Scott, fair to say you didn't examine or test every piece of clothing that was used in this case, is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you explain to us what went into your determination of which items to examine?
We read the police report, take into account the circumstances of the case, and consult with the investigators to determine which items might have the most value forensically.
Now, in addition to these items of clothing, at some point did you receive from the medical examiner's office a kit that was conducted on Ms. Ritzer at autopsy?
I did.
And can you describe for the jury how that kit arrives to you?
The kit is a box filled with a series of swabs and trace evidence collections, and that comes sealed into our evidence unit and is stored in a cold storage area.
And when you had an opportunity to examine the kit that was received from the medical examiner's office in this case, can you describe for us what all it contained?
It contained vaginal swabs, external genital swabs, anorectal swabs, perianal swabs, oral swabs, control swabs, head hair combings, pubic hair combings, and
Do you need to refer to your notes?
I do.
If she could refer to her notes, Your Honor.
Any objection with that?
No objection.
Okay, memory exhausted, she may.
And a foreign material collection.
And when you say you described a series of swabs from various parts of the body, what do those swabs look like when you examine them? Meaning, are they literally swabs?
Yes, they are. They're either 2 swabs or 4 swabs.
Okay. And what, if any, initial testing did you do on the vaginal swabs?
I screened the vaginal swabs for the presence of blood.
And what was the result of that screening?
Positive.
And what other testing did you do on the vaginal swabs?
I also cut a small portion of one of the swabs, and I added several chemicals, and I did an extraction for sperm cells.
And does that extraction work in the same way you described when you were testing the underwear?
It does.
And what were the results of your extraction of the vaginal swabs?
I found 2 sperm cells.
And when you say you found 2 sperm cells, literally, are you looking under a microscope and seeing 2 sperm cells?
Yes.
And what did you do with respect to the sperm cells that you located in the vaginal swabs? What did you do to preserve them?
I took the swabs and I put them into small tubes and preserved them for DNA analysis.
With respect to the external genital swabs, anorectal swabs, and perianal swabs, did you do additional testing on those 3 sets of swabs?
Yes, I did.
And did you test them for the presence of blood?
I did.
What were the results on those 3 swabs for the presence of blood?
Those were positive.
What about, did you do further testing on them for other biological materials?
Yes, I also extracted all of those for sperm cells.
And what were the results for those 3 items?
Those were negative.
So you had a positive result for sperm cells in the vaginal swab, but not the other swabs, is that correct?
Correct.
And did you do any testing on the oral swabs?
Yes, I did.
Did you have any positive results at all on the oral swabs?
No, I did not.
Okay. What's a control swab?
Control swab is a swab that's collected at the hospital with whatever moistening agent they use to moisten the swabs before they're used on the body.
Okay. And do you then test that swab to make sure you're not finding any biologicals to assure you that the moistening agent is clean?
We do not.
Okay. And you indicated there were head hair combings as well?
I did.
Did you do any testing on the head hair combings?
I examined the head hair combings.
And what, if any, things did you note in the head hair combings, or positive results did you get?
I noted that there were numerous human hairs, and some of them were red-brown stained, and there were also red-brown stains on the collection paper.
And did you do any testing on those red-brown stains?
I did. I screened them for the presence of blood and tested them for human blood.
Now, with respect to the head hair combings, the pubic hair combings, as well as the general foreign materials collection, did you note anything present in all 3 of those items? Not biological in nature.
May I refer to my notes?
Is your memory exhausted?
Yes.
If she could refer to her notes now.
Sure.
Vegetative debris and soil.
And just to be clear, in the head hair, pubic hair, and foreign materials collection kit?
That's correct.
And just to be clear, I think the kit that you received from the medical examiner's office, was that kit labeled with a person's name? Not as to the person who took it, but the person it was taken from?
I have a photocopy of the kit box. I'd have to look at that.
Is your memory exhausted as to that?
Yes.
If she could look at that, Your Honor.
Sure.
There wasn't a name on the kit.
Okay. Was there a name as to who took the kit?
Yes, the OCME McDonald.
Thank you. And there's a number affiliated with the kit, is that fair to say?
Yes, there is.
If you could just tell us that number.
It's 46405.
Okay, thank you. If I could have 1 moment, Your Honor.
Sure.
I have nothing further from Ms. Scott.
Good morning.
Morning.
So, about what time did you arrive at Danvers High School?
Approximately 6:30 a.m., I believe.
All right. You didn't arrive with Kelly King. She was already there.
She was already there.
So, at the point you arrived, you knew that the body had been found.
Yes.
You knew there were at least 2 crime scenes,
Yes.
one in the bathroom, one in the woods, and maybe some other part of the school, correct?
Correct.
You knew the defendant had been arrested.
I did.
You knew he was 14 years old.
I did.
And one of the things you did was you examined Mr. Chism, correct?
Yes.
And I think you said you checked his hands, red-brown stains, did preliminary tests on them?
There was a red-brown stain on one hand, yes.
On one hand. And you also checked him for the presence of injuries?
Just his hands.
All right. Now, why did you check him for the presence of injuries on his hands?
To see if there were any injuries that would have caused bleeding.
All right. And so you weren't, it was not your intention to check to see if there was any evidence of struggle or combat or anything like that?
No.
And is that why you didn't check any other part of his body also, correct?
Correct.
You mentioned that that you did some preliminary tests for maybe seminal fluid on the underpants, correct?
Yes.
Did you also use an alternate light source on the underpants?
Yes, I did.
Okay, what was the purpose of that?
That is, we used that to see if there were any stains that we can't see with the naked eye.
All right. Does that include seminal fluid stains?
It could.
What other stains do you look for with that alternate light source?
We just look for stains. We don't, there isn't a particular kind of stain that we're looking for.
All right. But there are certain kinds of stains that the alternate light source helps to bring out for
Correct.
you, correct? What are those?
It could be semen, it could be saliva, it could also be blood.
Okay, so it could be other biological fluids or blood that you missed.
Yes, it could.
Okay. And I think you mentioned, or if you didn't, I think that you did, in your conclusions in the report that you prepared, that a screening test for the presence of seminal fluid protein was negative, sperm cells were not detected. Were the panties the only item that you tested or searched for seminal fluid on?
Other than the items that were in the kit, yes.
All right. So as far as the evidence items, the clothing items from Mr. Chism and from the victim in this case, you didn't examine any of them except the underpants for seminal fluid, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You mentioned a number of things that came back from the ME's office for you to examine at a later point. When did you actually do the testing on these items back in the lab?
Which items are you referring to?
Well, for example, when did you examine the underpants in the lab?
May I refer to my notes?
Certainly.
January 27th, 2014.
Okay. And did you examine most of the items in your criminalistics report starting around that time in January?
I did.
And then one of the things that came back from the ME's office were fingernail scrapings from the victim, correct?
Judge, if we could just clarify which criminalistics report we're talking about there.
Sure.
So you prepared a crime scene report about your activities at the crime scene that night, correct?
Correct.
And then I think you issued a corrected version of it,
Yes.
and that you issued in November, correct? November 7th?
Yes.
Okay. And then you prepared a criminalistics report, numeral 1, reporting on your examination of clothing items and swabs and evidence items brought back from the scene, correct?
Yes.
And that report was dated March of 2014.
Correct.
Okay. And those are items that you began examining in January, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
And you also prepared a criminalistics report about your examination of the contents of the rape kit, correct?
Correct.
All right. So among the items that you received from the medical examiner's office were fingernail scrapings from the victim, correct?
I'd have to refer to our evidence
Please do it.
submission.
I'm looking on number item 13-2 on the case jacket list. If that helps.
Yes, fingernail scrapings.
Okay. And what's the purpose of collecting fingernail scrapings?
To see if there's any foreign material or DNA.
And would that be something that would be helpful in determining whether there had been some struggle or whether there had been some resistance by the victim?
It could.
Because it could have scrapings from the suspect, correct?
Yes.
All right. And you might even have his DNA under her fingernails, correct?
That's possible.
All right. You never processed or examined the fingernail scrapings, correct?
I did not.
And when you brought you had the swabs from the tree branch out there. You examined them in the back of the lab. You confirmed that there was human blood on them, correct?
Yes.
All right. Did you do anything to determine whether there was seminal fluid or semen on those swabs?
I did not.
Thank you.
To clarify, Ms. Scott, the items of clothing, you didn't begin testing until January, is that correct?
That's correct.
With respect to the kit you received from the ME's office, do you remember when you began testing that?
I tested that at the beginning of November.
So the testing that was done on the kit was done in November. The testing of the other items was done later in January. Is that fair to say?
That's correct.
Okay. And with respect to the fingernail clippings, what are the considerations when you're deciding what items to test?
When it comes to trace evidence collection, such as fingernail scrapings, we first process the rest of the kit and determine if there are any positive biological fluids, and if there are, we don't move on to those other trace collections.
And in this case, you had a positive result for sperm in the vaginal swab.
Correct.
I have nothing further.
But just to be clear, having a positive result for sperm in the vaginal swab doesn't tell you what you could learn by examining the fingernail clippings, correct? Or it doesn't tell you all of what you could learn.
I guess there could be foreign DNA underneath the fingernail
Correct.
clippings.
You could learn something about whether there had been a struggle or resistance between these two people, correct?
That I wouldn't be able to tell. I would just be able to say that there might be foreign DNA under the fingernails.
That the defendant's DNA or skin particles could be under the victim's nails.
It's possible that there could be foreign material under the fingernails,
Right.
yes.
And you could learn that by examining the fingernail scrapings.
We would have to do DNA testing on them, yes.
Okay, thank you. Next witness, please.
Brian?
Someone asks you to stop. You have to turn face the clerk, she will swear you in. Sir, do you solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give in the cause now in hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
You may be seated.
Make yourself comfortable. Should you need the laser pointer, it's there. And if you just face us on for a moment before we begin.
Good morning. There's been a motion to sequester witnesses in the case, so until all the evidence is over, you can only be in the courtroom when you testify. You can't talk about your testimony with the other witnesses, or let them talk about theirs with you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good morning, or good afternoon, Mr. Cunningham. No, good morning. Can you please introduce yourself?
Good morning. Yes, my name is Brian J. Cunningham, and that's Cunningham, and I work at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab. I'm a supervisor in the DNA unit, and I'm a crime scene specialist with our crime scene response unit.
And Mr. Cunningham, is part of your duties as a crime scene response unit specialist, does that include taking of so-called DNA standards?
Yes, it does.
Can you explain to the jury what a DNA standard is?
Sure. A DNA standard is a sample. It's usually a saliva sample collected directly from an individual to be used for comparison to evidence, DNA results obtained from evidence in that case.
Is it sometimes referred to as a known standard?
Yes, it is.
And sir, with respect to this case, on December 4th of 2013, did you have occasion to take a so-called DNA standard from the defendant, Philip Chism?
Yes, I did.
Did that take place in this courthouse?
Yes, it did.
And sir, can you just explain to us what you do or what you did in the case of Mr. Chism to take a DNA standard?
Sure. I was requested to arrive at the Salem Superior Courthouse here at 3 o'clock on December 4th, and I did. I met up with ADA McDougal, defense attorney Denise Regan, and Trooper Steve Bukhari.
And did you eventually make contact with Mr. Chism?
Yes.
And can you describe for us what physically you did with respect to Mr. Chism?
Yes, so I came prepared with a DNA saliva collection kit, a buccal collection kit. And the kit is basically an envelope with places to identify who you're collecting from on the outside. On the inside, there's a cardboard fold which has inside of it FTA paper. And that's chemically treated paper that preserves any kind of cell, usually epithelial cells is what we're collecting in this case, for DNA testing. Also in the kit is a styrofoam swab. And what I did is I take the swab and I run it along the cheeks and the gums of the individual identified as Philip Chism, then press that swab against the FTA paper, seal the kit, label the kit to identify the individual it's collected from, seal it with my initials on that date as well, and eventually I bring it back to the lab where it's going to be given a unique identifying number, logged into our LIMS, our laboratory electronic management system, and given a case number as well as a unique identifying number.
And did you do that in this case, sir?
I did all of that, yes.
Fair to say you weren't involved in any of the further DNA testing done by your unit with respect to this case?
I was not.
I have nothing further for Mr. Cunningham. No questions.
Okay, thank you, sir. I'll see counsel to sign. bit about scheduling before we let you go for the day. We've moved ahead of schedule. A lot of that has to do with having a jury that's here ready to come into the courtroom at 9 o'clock in the morning. I can't tell you when you'll be a deliberating jury in the case, but I certainly can estimate for you when you'll be a deliberating jury in the case. And my estimate for you is December 11th, that you would have the case as a deliberating jury. Just keep in mind, I can promise you nothing. The pace of trial sometimes changes and moves ahead of schedule, as we have in this case, and sometimes when we're ahead of schedule, we move behind schedule. But that's my estimate for you. Now, we could have you come in tomorrow, but it wouldn't be for a full day, and it wouldn't really make a difference on when you'd get the case, so it doesn't seem a good use of your time to have you come in here for an hour and a half or 2 hours tomorrow. So that means you won't be back until next Monday, which I think is November 30th. Now, between now and November 30th, there's something that's going to happen. It's called Thanksgiving. And when you get to Thanksgiving, some of you will have 5 people around the table, some of you will have 50 people around the table, and most of you will have someplace in between 5 and 50. And every single one of those people around that table is going to come at you and try and get you to talk about the case. And then when you don't, during the appetizers, they'll come at you during dinner. When you don't talk about it with them during dinner, they'll try again during dessert. When that doesn't work, they'll try it during a timeout, during a football game. They will be indefatigable. You just have to tell them, I'm going to have to leave Thanksgiving if you keep on trying to talk to me, or you'll have to leave my house if you're the one doing all the work. You cannot talk to them about the case at all, and you really need to be persistent with them, that you can't hear anything about the case. If anybody asks you, for instance, are you on that case, just leave the room and tell them you can't come back if people are talking about the case. I'm sure people will get the message. I have to check with Ms. Draper on one point first. Do we know? So, now, as far as work is concerned, I cannot tell you don't go to work between now and next Monday. I can't tell you that. I would strongly prefer that you not go to your place of employment between now and next Monday if you have coworkers in the same place of employment, because they will have figured out what case you're on, and you'll have all those obstacles for you to deal with as you try to prevent them from talking to you about the case. Just the way you've comported yourself since this trial began, the way that you're punctual, the way that you dress, the way you are figuratively and literally leaning into the evidence. Part of my job is to look over at you about every 10 or 15 minutes, and I can see how engaged and serious each one of you is. And I know that you'll do your absolute best, but you also, as part of your job as the sole and exclusive judges of the facts of this case, have to be able to communicate to people who could never get what you're doing and what your awesome responsibility is, that you absolutely will not talk about the case. When the case is over, you can talk about it with whomever you want for as long as you want. And you can tell them that, while that might be the case, you're not going to talk about it at all. So I strongly prefer that you not go to work between now and when we reconvene next Monday. I remind you that the view is on December 2nd, so that'll be a longer day. I'll talk to you a little bit more about how you might want to dress for the day. Do not discuss the case among yourselves with anybody else. Don't do any independent research concerning the case. Avoid any information from any source other than when in the courtroom. If something unexpectedly comes on the radio or on TV, or you inadvertently have a peripheral glance at something in the newspaper, immediately divert your attention, so that when you get into that jury room sometime around December 11th and you stop to talk about this case with your fellow jurors, that you know that you're doing it with integrity, with seriousness, and you follow the court's instructions. Because when you do get in there sometime around December 11th and you do start to talk about the case, you will be really taken aback by just how seriously your fellow jurors have taken their commitment, the seriousness of all of you, your collective intelligence, your collective wisdom, and your commitment to this case. So with that said, the jurors are excused until next Monday morning at 9 o'clock.
All rise.